Move on to another special address, and I'm quite sure we'll learn again quite a bit from what's going on from the government side. Uh, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, the Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. And as you know, India is not the only country who is facing a lot of challenge. As you know, there are various things, various dynamic changes which are happening in the world, facing challenges, inflation, creation of jobs, maintaining growth, fiscal balance, so many things. And I'm quite sure we'll learn quite a bit from Dr. Nageswaran's speech. Welcome, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, and we all wait for your speech. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good morning rather. It is a pleasure to be able to share my thoughts with you. I commend the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and the creation of the Indo-Pacific Chamber Network as a very timely intervention to have happened, given the increasing importance of both India and the Pacific to global affairs. I would have ideally loved to be there in person talking to you. However, due to circumstances, I am forced to deliver this lecture virtually. Please accept my sincere apologies, but I thank the Bengal Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. And with your permission, I will quickly share the screen here. Okay. So I hope you're all able to share the screen, navigating the present for a sustainable future. In general, India's growth story after the pandemic years of 2021 and 2022 has now shifted towards sustaining the growth in the medium term. The response and recovery phase is over. Now it's all about consolidation. And mainly speaking, our banking and non-banking and corporate sectors went through a period of balance sheet adjustment. You have done well. You have adjusted, you have repaired your balance sheets, and you are now ready to put it to use. And that augurs very well for the economy. That's the bottom line. Just to quickly walk you through some last 2 decades of history, between 2005 and 12, India had a credit boom. I don't have the time to wade into statistics, but it's all there in the Economic Survey Chapter 2 as to what kind of credit boom we experienced in that era, which turned out to be unsustainable. And then between 2015 onwards, we recognized those loans and started repairing them gradually, steadily, and slowly. Then before we could put the banks and corporates in good shape, the IL&FS non-banking financial company collapsed further, compounding the troubles the economy was facing from the financial sector stress. That is why economic growth in 1819 and 1920 decelerated even before the pandemic happened. And then in 2022, and then in 2019 to 20 or even 21, the pandemic came into our lives, disrupting individual lives and economic growth prospects, not only in India, but around the world in general. Advanced countries were not spared. And by the time we could put that behind us by the end of the calendar year 2021, then in February the war in Ukraine led to oil price shock, food price shock, global supply chain disruptions, etc. So we have been facing a systemic financial system stress, which was compounded by many one-off issues, the pandemic, the supply shock, oil price shock, etc. But now we hope that the economy has weathered all of them very well and managed to post very good growth rates in the last 2 years and is poised to do so in the coming year as well. And not only in the coming year, FY24 and FY25, but also down the road. Why are we poised for good and steady growth in the rest of the decade? And the reason is this. If you compare what happened to India between 1998 and 2002, a lot of important reforms were happening in the first NDA government. But at the same time, there were one-off shocks. The nuclear device testing happened, sanctions followed. As it was the case in the last 7 to 8 years, between 2012 and 2020, the banking and the corporate sector balance sheets had to be repaired even then as well. 2 successive droughts, technology sector bust happened, US entered into a recession, 9/11 happened, so many one-off shocks like now. But alongside these one-off shocks, good and important reforms were happening, but they all began to play out in the economy once the one-off shocks faded away. And between 2003 and 2008, India experienced 5 years of very good growth thanks to benign global conditions. We grew at more than 8 and even closer to 9% for 5 years. Fast forward 20 years later, similarly, we have faced many one-off shocks. Same banking, non-banking, corporate sector crisis. Unprecedented shocks, I just listed them to you. But simultaneously, many path-breaking structural reforms have been pursued by the government, starting with financial inclusion, Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar, banking system cleanup, single indirect tax, insolvency and bankruptcy code, Real Estate Regulation Act, continuous efforts at ease of doing business, decriminalizing and removing outdated laws from the legal books, and more importantly, government's continued emphasis or expanded emphasis in a very big way on physical and digital infrastructure. As a result, today we have had 9.1% growth in FY22, 7.2% in FY23, and we are poised to grow at 6.5% per annum on average for this year and the remainder of the decade. Why am I talking about 6.5% and not 7.5, 8? It is because we are not experiencing the kind of global growth that we experienced between 2003 and 2008. Global economy is going to go through a period of uncertainty, geopolitical fragmentation, geo-economic inefficiencies, reversal of globalization. All these factors are currently underway. Whereas between 2003 and 2008, globalization was in its heydays and interest rates were low or were being lowered globally. Now interest rates are either still rising or going to remain at a very high level. That is why we are realistic about our growth prospects, which is still going to be one of the world's most highest growth rates at 6.5% per annum in real terms and 11% in nominal terms. Indian economy has made so much of progress in the last 8 years. You can see that in this table here. 2014, the economy was 10th ranked. Now it is 5th ranked. And within the end of this decade, it may become the 3rd largest economy in the world. Our share of global GDP has increased. Our share in global trade and services has increased. Our share in global foreign direct investment flows has increased. India's weight in the BRICS countries, in the stock indices, it has gone up. In emerging markets, it has gone up from 7 to 16%. We are now part of the JP Morgan Global Bond Index. And in climate change performance, even though India has not been a contributor to global emissions in the last 200 years, we still are doing better than many other countries, and in innovation and ease of doing business. So we have put in the hard work. Some rewards are already visible despite a very difficult decade, which was culminating in COVID and then the war in Ukraine. But now we are going to reap the dividends of steady growth. But what else can we do to become not only the 3rd largest economy in aggregate size, but also in per capita terms, becoming a middle income or upper middle income country? For that, we need to make sure that the aspiring middle class is not only able to get the kind of goods and services that they need, but they're also in a position to contribute. India is going to have 55% of the population in the middle class very soon, and they will be demanding quality goods and services. And that only you can provide. More importantly, we also, and this is not just a task of the public sector, but also the private sector, to prepare the Indian demographic dividend, the Indian youth bulge, to prepare them well, to be able to participate in the growing economy and reap the personal rewards for themselves and their families. That means right skilling, right education, right attitudes. Multiple intelligences are the key words. Today, information is ubiquitous. And how do we process the information and put it together is the key for our youth to be employable. So the kind of skills that new education policy envisages are the right ones for our youth going into the 21st century. So it is not about completing schooling or college, but about the right kind of skills, attitudes, and knowledge and literacy levels. That will in turn raise the productivity of labor force and make corporates pause and think about deploying technology reflexively. The corporates also have a social responsibility to think about the trade-offs between short-term profitability, which will come from deploying technology, but which has very adverse social consequences. They may, like artificial intelligence, etc. Our businesses need to be mindful that corporate social responsibility is not a favor that they are doing, but actually a favor that they are doing to themselves by thinking medium term and long term. Without social stability, there is no economic stability and there is no corporate profitability. Second, we need to empower women for inclusive growth. Of course, women need to exercise their own choice. Whether staying at home and taking care of the family and the elders and the children is not a mean activity. In fact, if anything, it is the most difficult activity than going to an office. But the choice should be exercised by women. And for that, governments and the private sector must do whatever they can to make the workplace safer, conducive, friendly, harmonious, and our streets safer, and their education levels to be improved. In fact, women always perform better in academic institutions and in career than men. And even financial institutions have discovered in the Western countries that frequent bubbles and busts will not happen if more women were in charge, because they don't get driven by testosterone in making decisions on when to invest, where to invest, or in chasing bubbles and fads. So in many ways, women's participation in the economy is a good thing, and the state and the private sector have to facilitate it. But the choice has to be exercised by the women. Third important contributor to improving India's 6.5% to a higher level is our willingness and the ability to take care of micro, small, and medium enterprises. We need to make sure that they are able to get access to finance, access to talent, and we don't bog them down in rules, licensing, inspection, and compliance. And private sector businesses must find ways to pay their MSME suppliers on time. The budget FY24 came up with a very important innovation, a nudge. Businesses cannot set off their expenditure on payments due to MSMEs unless they have actually paid. But businesses on their own volition should use the receivables exchanges in the country. Accept the invoices they accept for GST purposes and discount them in receivables exchanges so that the MSMEs get paid on time. If MSMEs get paid on time, India will have a vibrant middle economy, middle set of factories, and that is eventually a win-win even for large corporations. Then there are three other important global value chains that India has to continue to develop. We have to plug ourselves into the global value chain. You saw in the earlier slide that our share of global manufacturing is still relatively small and global trade in goods is relatively small. That is why the government has introduced the PLI scheme, Gati Shakti, logistics plan, etc. But once again, I think the private sector must also think in terms of long run, large scale, and invest in research and development. Otherwise, the manufacturing share of GDP will not rise, and manufacturing provides employment to low and semi-skilled workers. Our farms, like factories, are very small. We need to consolidate land. And that is where the state governments have a role to play in easing land use conversion laws and also facilitating land acquisition. Economic size of a farm is apparently 4 hectares to be profitable for a farmer. So we need to allow land consolidation. And farming is going to be still an important activity for a large country with a large population. And agtech and agricultural food processing can still contribute to both manufacturing growth and employment generation. Therefore, agriculture is not going to be an activity of a bygone era, but it still has a future. And we still need to do same activity as we pursue in manufacturing, which is to create scale. And we have to build our value chains which are resistant to global fissures and pressures and tensions. We need to plug ourselves into global supply chain and make ourselves attractive for a China plus one strategy, because India has an opportunity today due to geopolitical developments, and we need to harness it very quickly and very actively, making sure that the last mile infrastructure is created and there is plug and play and seamless movement from factory to the port, and also law and order, as well as the infrastructure support, so that workers in large scale can come to factories and go back safely to their homes, etc. The biggest challenge of all these things, apart from knowledge, skilling, MSME, women in the workforce, scaling up the economy in farms and factories, is the energy security and global green transition and climate global warming. India needs to understand that there is global warming, of course, and it is a problem to be tackled, but we cannot sacrifice growth. In the short run, we need fossil fuels, and more importantly, we need our own resources to invest for green transition. To invest, we need savings. To save, we need income. And for income, we need growth. And for growth, we need affordable energy. So economic growth and energy transition are not in contradiction to one another. One complements the other. So India has to continue to stand up for its right to pursue economic growth in the coming years without jeopardizing its climate goals, which India actually is ahead of other countries. And lastly, it is not just about climate, it is about sustainable development goal challenges. Climate is only one of the challenges, and economics is about trade-offs. We don't have infinite resources. Sometimes it is important to decide that whether we can mitigate temperature increases, but more importantly, we have to make sure that our water is safe and our air is cleaner to drink, to breathe. So sustainable development goals are as important as climate goals. And in this report, Vivek Debroy, the chairman of the EAC-PM, and Bjorn Lomborg have listed 12 areas where India can actually get greater bang for the buck. And this is once again not just an area of intervention for the government and state governments, but also for the private sector. Therefore, India, among the global countries, has done the very best in handling COVID, vaccinating its population, getting the economy back on track, maintaining economic stability, putting the financial sector and corporate sector balance sheets into good shape so that they can borrow and invest. And therefore, a steady and vigorous growth of 6.5% per annum at the minimum is assured for the next several years. But in order to sustain the cycle for a longer period than before, and to increase this growth rate, the various areas I touched upon are important. If we address them, along with importance of securing affordable and reliable power, for which state governments have a big role to play, and land reforms, etc., our potential growth can grow from 6.5% to 7.5%, and our ability to deliver a middle-class standard of living for the entire economy, and upper middle class even, will not only be a dream, but an attainable aspiration. Thank you very much once again for the rest of the session that you have today, and I look forward to being with you in your next edition. Thank you.